Ready to go.
We're good to go?
Yep.
All right, we are. Okay, good morning, all. This is day 2 of the Oregon Water Resources Commission meeting. It's February 24th, 2023. Nirvana, maybe I'll just also, well, I guess I'm not sure it helps because anybody who's hearing this has to be on the Zoom anyway, but we're having trouble with the live stream this morning. So that will not be available as a means, a real-time means of viewing the meeting, but Nirvana will get it up on the web as soon as she can after the meeting is over, get the recording up. So our first item of business this morning is approval of minutes. Have all the commissioners had the opportunity to review the minutes?
Yes.
Everybody's good? All right, thank you. So I'll just ask for a motion to approve. And a second?
I move to approve the November meeting minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you. Moved by Kathy and seconded by Jan. I'm just going to go around the screen. Kathy?
Yes.
Woody?
Yes.
Julie?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Jan?
Yes.
Meg? Yes. And the minutes are approved. Thanks, everybody. So next item is the director's report. Doug, you're up.
Good morning, Commission. For the record, Doug Woodcock, Acting Director, Water Resources Department. And got a few things here. You'll see in the director's report, it covers a lot of territory. I'm going to touch on some things that are within and without the director's report this morning. One of the items that should have been included in the director's report and was an oversight was in January 2023, and I believe you all received a copy of the Secretary of State audit that came out, and it really is, it's called an audit, but it wasn't really a formal audit. It wasn't a performance audit of the agency or agencies. It was more broadly looking at governance, water governance in Oregon. And so there were a number of interviews that happened across the state agencies who touch on water, a number of interviews outside of state government with stakeholders, with water interests and tribes as well. And the report came out really focused on a need for more formalized water governance in Oregon. And so it touched on a number of recommendations provided, and more than I'm going to go through here, but it touched on things such as, commitments on shared priorities around water decision and water security. So much of this report talks on decision-making around water. Convening a water policy and planning body, increasing awareness and public engagement around urgent water challenges, integrating federally recognized tribes as equal partners and co-managers in water making decisions, adapting strategic approach to water funding. So all good points and worthy of much further consideration and discussion, and that's what is happening. There are conversations that are happening at many different levels around this, and there's more to come on this, and we'll keep the commission apprised as things develop around these notions to see what begins to crystallize here. I wanted to share.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I just want just a quick follow-up on that. Who's kind of leading? Is there an agency that's kind of in the lead on that effort? Or those
right
efforts?
Now, yes, Chair Reeves, right now, because this is pretty new, and this was instituted by the Secretary of State's office, many of these recommendations that are in, or several of these recommendations that were in the report, have found pieces of legislation that are happening right now. And within those pieces of legislation, proposed at this point. Some bills have dropped. There are agencies identified and as to how it is that they are going to integrate around these issues. So we are discussing it at the Water Corps team, which is that body of deputy directors of natural resource agencies as well. So it's still formulating what this is going to look like moving forward. So we are talking about it amongst natural resource agencies and the governor's office as well. What does water governance look like? So there's no one agency right now that has taken the spear and is charging down the field, but we are all talking about it.
Okay. All right, thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
No worries, no problem. I want to touch on an issue that I know we've had conversations about in the past. And good morning, Commissioner Quimps.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I've been on.
Another issue that we've been talking about in the past, not formally so much, but that is around staff safety. And of recent, we've had conversations at the natural resource agencies level about concern about staff safety when they're out undertaking their duties in the field. And there have been some incidences. We in the water world have experienced this for a very long time. And of course, if you're thinking about how a water master is responsible for going up to somebody's door and knocking on their door and telling them that they are shut off from any further appropriation until otherwise notified, there's no happy message in that. And so there is lots of opportunity for conflict around water master duties. Well, other agencies are experiencing this as well in different fashions. And so the natural resource agencies have undertaken to solicit feedback from the field staff across the agencies and formulate their input into a report that we can begin to work with, so we can structure what is it that we need to do to ensure and improve staff safety across the state. And so these, the kinds of things that will likely come out of this will be understanding the nature of the issues, understanding the nature of how it is that staff do their field work. Where are the tension points around the work that staff do in the field? What is our relationship with law enforcement across the state? I know different agencies have different relationships with the different levels of law enforcement. To what degree can we incorporate formalized training for staff around field safety? So there are a number of things. This is all very new right now. We're just basically having these conversations and soliciting this staff feedback. So again, more to come on this, and we'll share the report when the formal report is put together. Any questions on that? Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about some litigation that has at least temporarily resolved itself in Oregon with the department, just to give you some context for some of these cases and some of the decisions. I'll start with let's start with the transfers of stored water. That was well, I take that back. I'm going to start with the UROC decision today. So this is UROC v. Bureau of Reclamation. And this had to do with how the Bureau of Reclamation was operating the Klamath project and how it was operating dam releases or water releases from Upper Klamath Lake and supporting flows downstream with regards to the biological opinion and the operations plan that had been agreed upon. And so there are many players in this litigation. This was in Northern District of California. And so I'm going to park that just for a moment. There's a lawsuit going on, Bureau of Reclamation. Over the years, since about, I think about 2018 or so, there have been many lawsuits that have been filed by the Klamath Irrigation District against the Oregon Water Resources Department. And they center around how it is that the water master is managing water, how the water master is managing Upper Klamath Lake water with regards to the Bureau of Reclamation. So the Bureau of Reclamation owns the infrastructure around Upper Klamath Lake. And from the department's position, we have understood it that the Bureau of Reclamation, a Department of an Interior agency, a federal agency, has responsibilities to the Endangered Species Act. And the department's position over the years has been that as reclamation is releasing water from the Upper Klamath Lake for environmental flows downstream, that is their prerogative and that is their responsibility. And the department has not inserted itself in reclamation's operations around those releases. We received several lawsuits on that over time in Marion Circuit Court, and the department's arguments around the Bureau responsibilities and the Endangered Species Act did not resonate with the court. And ultimately, the court ordered the department to issue an order to the Bureau of Reclamation, ordering them to cease releasing water downstream, waters in excess of water rights downstream that would utilize that water. And the waters specifically called out were for what is called determined claim KA 1000. And those are the waters that rely, or those are the determined claim that relies on waters of the Klamath River and waters of Upper Klamath Lake. So we issued an order, I think it was on April 6th. Oh gosh, I don't have that in front of me. I think it was 2021. I apologize if that date is not accurate, but that order was issued to the Bureau of Reclamation. The Bureau of Reclamation then essentially brought Water Resources Department into the UROC case because it all is tied together. This is about managing the flows in Upper Klamath Lake and the Klamath River for the endangered species. And this particular order was interpreted by the Bureau of Reclamation to preclude them from being able to meet their requirements under the Endangered Species Act. On February 2 of 2023, the Northern District of California issued an order affirming the Bureau's responsibility to adhere to the Endangered Species Act, and thus ordering that the order that the state of Oregon issued to the Bureau of Reclamation was in no effect. And so while the arguments that we made in the Northern District of California were defending our actions, recall that those actions were ordered by the Marion Circuit Court. And so essentially our arguments at Marion Circuit Court were affirmed by the federal court. And so this is a significant decision. It is one that has great policy ramifications, both for the Klamath tribes and lake levels in Upper Klamath Lake, but also for the downstream tribes as well, and their call for water downstream for the anadromous fish. So more to come on this, because I'm going to circle back to this on another litigation that I'm going to talk about, or not litigation, but department activities in the Klamath Basin, and I will reference the UROC case when I come back to this. So the next item, well, I'll pause. Any questions on UROC v. BOR? Okay. We had another decision in Marion Circuit Court just recently on what we call the transfers of stored water issue. And the transfers of stored water is a very, it's another long ongoing issue. It's been going on since about 2018. So for context, the department in the past has always felt it had the authority to accept an application from somebody that wanted to modify their certificate relating to stored water. And so we would take that request and we would, if everything aligned, we would approve a change in the place of use or the location of the storage, perhaps the point of diversion, how that storage diverts water, where it diverts water to fill the storage, the character of use. So what is it that they're using that water for? These are all things related to the certificate of stored water. And in 2018, we received some advice from the Oregon Department of Justice, turning that around, saying that we did not actually have the authority to do those transfers. And so that was a pretty big shift. That was a huge shift for the department. And since 2018, we have not been processing requests for changes in storage. With that, several work groups were undertaken over the years to try to find some resolution around this that would lead to a legislative fix for the state that would declare clearly those authorities to be able to undertake this. Those work groups were unsuccessful in being able to find a fix that would satisfy everybody's concerns and interests in this issue. And so a legislative fix has not been in the works. The department has not been accepting applications. We have a very few number of applications before us right now, but generally we have not been accepting those applications. In 2022, I believe it was, early of 2022, again, apologize if I don't have that absolutely correct, we refused to accept an application for a storage user called the Bridge Creek Ranch, whereby they wanted to change the point of diversion, and that is where it is that they divert water to be able to fill their reservoir, and we refused to accept the application, citing that we didn't have the authority to process it. Suit was brought against the agency to a mandamus to actually force the department to process this application. It was filed in Marion Circuit Court, and arguments on both sides ensued. We had gone to the court, and both sides had agreed that this is really matters of fact. This is really about, does the department have or does not have the authority to accept and process these applications? Do we have the authority to change a certificate of storage? And so a decision came down on that just very recently. And the Marion Circuit Court said, yes, department, you do have the authority to change certificates that address stored water. And so we worked with our Department of Justice as to what this means. And the significance that we came away with and was most concerning for us, because I'll tell you, from the department's position, we are really just looking for a solution here. We just want an answer. The statutes are difficult in both ways, regardless of which way it comes down. And we're in a very awkward position. This is something we've been doing for decades, and now we're not doing it. And we just want to get this resolved. So we're not necessarily unhappy with the decision that came out of Marion Circuit. The concern that we have is that the decision is not binding across the state. It is really binding between the state of Oregon and the applicant. And as other applications were to be received, accepted, and processed, they're not subject to the decision in the Marion Circuit Court. We could point to it and say, look at what that judge said, but they're not binding. And we are looking, so what that means is that it could be protested. And then that protest would go through a hearing at the Office of Administrative Hearings. The decision that would come out of that could be appealed to the Court of Appeals. And so there's process, time, and money involved in all of that. And we're right back to where we are today, essentially. Except today we're actually a bit more advanced than that, because now at least we have a decision out of Marion Circuit Court, and we are pursuing appeal of that decision. We feel there's two pieces to this. One, it is a shortcut for us to getting to the Court of Appeals and getting a decision that would be binding statewide. And therefore, as other applications for the transfer of storage were received and processed, we would have a statewide decision that would guide this whole kind of miasma around the department's authority here. Several people, several interests would prefer that we not appeal this, that we just take the decision and we run with it. Our concern is that this is going to just lead to protests, Office of Administrative Hearings. We're going to end up back in Court of Appeals already, and we are going to short circuit that, and we've gone right to the Court of Appeals. We have actually appealed at this point. So we've done this because we want to preserve our options here. We had, a short window with which to appeal. We've done that. We are observing how things are playing out in other matters. So a significant piece in all of this, in my mind, is a case that we are watching with legislation that we are watching with the city of Newport. They have 2 dams, and the dams are deemed unsafe, and it's a public safety issue that needs to be addressed. And they've done a couple of things. They have self-assessed themselves to generate money for these repairs. They have succeeded in securing some dollars from the state of Oregon, and they have succeeded in getting a $60 million authorization from the federal government to help with these dam repairs, which are estimated to be up around $80 million. There are those that would say, department, just go ahead and process their application and move this forward. The concern is with our process and concerns about that being protested and held up, the timing would be such that they would lose their authorization. They would lose their access to those federal funds. And so the department is taking an observation approach on this. The city of Newport has developed legislation with their legislators. They have a bill that would essentially state that if you were in this situation, and there are qualifiers in this, you can apply for a change in transfer of, you can apply for a transfer of your storage right. And that's the movement of the reservoir, and the point of diversion for that reservoir. So we are observing this, keeping an eye to see whether this legislation is going to pass or not. But we may ultimately, we may ultimately repeal or dismiss our appeal at the Court of Appeals. Everything's on the table right now. But again, we're just trying to find some resolution, some long-term resolution around how it is that we are going to get back to where we can process these transfers and give some people some certainty on at least their process to be able to do this in the future. That was pretty windy. I'll pause there and see if there are any questions. Okay.
I don't see any hands up.
Just your own, Chair.
No, I'm good. Commissioner Mall has a question or a comment.
Thanks, Doug. I'm curious, given those two updates, in the Secretary of State's report, I don't remember any clear acknowledgement of this situation, not this particular case, but the fact that so much of what the department tries to move forward is hamstrung by appeal and lack of clarity around legal authorities and conflict with other sovereigns, state, federal, tribal. In the water team, is this being acknowledged as big a challenge as it is to going forward? That connect? I get the sense that so many of our collaborative efforts sort of ignore these legal challenges that we have.
Commissioner Mall, yes, there is there's very much a recognition of how difficult it can be around this, and the state of Oregon, it's recognized the state of Oregon provides significant due process around our decisions and others and how it is that they can engage with those decisions. There's many opportunities to be able to weigh in a legal setting to secure your due process in this, and that all has a cost, both financially and just in the investment of time and resources to be able to resolve these things. You are correct. I don't recall seeing anything in the Secretary of State's audit that talked about streamlining those processes. Much conversation around collaborative decision making and making sure that decisions are made in a manner that provide, consider equity and water security and things like that, but not so much the issue of just that legal capacity for people to weigh in and challenge decisions that are made by agencies. So it's a fair point. Okay, I will move on to the next item, which is a decision that came out just earlier this week. And this was Fort Klamath Critical Habitat v. Oregon Water Resources Department. And this has to do with a suit that was brought to the department around a decision that was made in approving a temporary transfer of a surface water right that is located above Upper Klamath Lake. The temporary transfer moving this water. I'm sorry, my computer is starting to act up on me and everything just went dark. Can you hear me? Please vocalize.
Yes,
I have no
Doug,
sound.
we
Yes.
can hear you. Can you hear us? Uh-oh.
Okay,
Can you hear
I'm
me,
going to
Doug?
keep talking, but I cannot hear you right now.
You're perfect on our end, Doug.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Woody.
Okay.
Woody has told me that you can hear me.
Good.
I will continue to work on this and see if there is. Okay, I'm going to continue on. Raise your hand, ask your question. Woody will walk over into my office and relay the question. How's that? So in Fort Klamath, we approved a temporary transfer of surface water from above Upper Klamath Lake in the Crooked River drainage, I believe, to a use down below Upper Klamath Lake, down to the wildlife refuges below the lake. And we were challenged on that on a number of fronts, citing the violation of the Klamath Compact, that the department cannot do an out-of-basin transfer. There were a number of issues that were raised. There was an injury issue that was raised. Just earlier this week in Marion Circuit Court, a decision was made that the department prevailed on all counts. I believe there were 5 of them altogether. And so this is significant, but before I talk about that a little bit, there's more opportunity for the protestants here, or I should say the petitioners, to file appeal on this. And they have some time with which to decide to do that. And so things are not completely resolved at this time. But the significance here is that there is an increasing interest and increasing monies available to undertake more of these types of transfers. That is, interests that would like to get water down to that lower or lands below Upper Klamath Lake, trying to get water down to those refuge to secure a more stable supply down there. And so there may be other requests for transactions to move temporarily move those waters down to the refuge. So that is the most recent piece of litigation, not reflected as an update in the director's report because that decision was so current here. Since I have lost my screens here, I've lost my notes as well. So just taking it off of memory, I would like to touch into a couple of items continuing on with the Klamath Basin here. 2 items of big interest, I think. And that is that Klamath Basin is once again going into another very difficult year with extremely low stream flows and overall supply. And we have been talking with water users down in the Klamath Basin since last fall, and primarily around those within the Klamath Project that are reliant year after year with these persistent and repeating droughts that we are seeing down in the Klamath Basin. The users have been fairly reliant on the department issuing drought permits, emergency drought permits, in the event they cannot access their primary surface water supply. And so for many years, that has been the practice, is that the Klamath County will request an emergency drought declaration from the governor's office. That goes through the state's water supply, water availability committee. They look at this and make a recommendation to the governor's office. That recommendation, if it is acted upon, a drought is declared. And that then opens up some tools that can be available to water users outside of their standard water rights. And one of these is the issuance of emergency drought permits. So if you have a surface water supply and let's say you don't have a supplemental groundwater supply, and your surface water supply is not available to you, you could request an emergency drought permit to utilize groundwater for the duration of the drought or the end of the year, whichever comes first. the end of the drought declaration, or the end of the year, whichever comes first. And we've done this for many years in a row. A couple of years ago, a particular issue arose down in the Klamath Project area that had not been an issue before. And that is with this repeated reliance on groundwater use. And not only do we have the emergency drought permits that are being requested, but there's also a significant number of primary and supplemental groundwater rights that already exist outside of the emergency drought permit process. They have that supplemental supply that they can rely on. And so there is a significant stress on the groundwater system already. And then you have this emergency drought, and you have the issuance of emergency drought permits, and you have this increased usage of groundwater to make up that deficit. Over time, that has lowered the water table in the aquifer in the Klamath Project area. 20 feet in many areas since 2001, 30 feet, 40 feet. I heard just recently that there was a well that has been measured that is now at 50 feet. And so last year, under the emergency drought declaration, there were requests for emergency drought permits, and the department initially chose not to issue emergency drought permits. And the reason is that we were receiving numerous complaints that domestic wells were going dry. So just think about it. When you're drilling your well for your household, it's a very common practice for people not to drill down until they encounter water and then keep drilling. They drill down until they encounter enough water that meets their domestic need, and they stop drilling. So these wells are considerably shallower than the irrigation wells that surround them. And what happened is we ended up receiving a couple of hundred complaints that wells had gone dry in the Klamath Basin. Domestic wells had gone dry as a result of a number of things. There was the drought, there was lack of natural recharge. The canals had not been charged. Some of that water leaks out and provides some recharge. I think that's unquantified at this point as to how much it supplies to the overall system. And then you've got increased groundwater pumping as well. So you've got all these domestic wells that are going dry. And that started off a lot of other emergency work. Some funds were made available. Office of Emergency Management, Klamath County Water Resources Department got together, and there were efforts to get water tanks out to people so they would have a domestic supply for their wells. Funds have been made available to help people deepen their wells. A lot of activity around that, trying to secure water supplies for people. So along comes 2023. We've been talking with the water users down there. We inform them at their request that we keep an eye on the hydrology of the basin and give them a notice ahead of the emergency whether or not we would be issuing emergency drought permits in the basin. And so just recently, as we have been looking across the basin, listening to the conversations about how much water is available in the Upper Klamath Lake to deliver to the Klamath Project, looking at the water levels in the wells, and looking at the surface water supplies coming into the lake. All of this information leads us to make the point that if the decision were made today, it's very unlikely that we would issue emergency drought permits within the Klamath Project. We have just received a couple of complaints this year so far about domestic wells going dry, but we have received a couple, and here we are in wintertime and we haven't even started the groundwater pumping yet. So we anticipate that, not fully understanding what the deliveries are going to be for the Klamath Basin or for the Klamath Project, But in the event that a emergency drought permit is declared, or emergency drought is declared in the Klamath Basin, in the event that an emergency is declared in the Klamath Basin, the department will not be issuing drought permits with some potential exceptions. And I talked about last year in 2023. Excuse me, just one moment if I can. I've lost my big screens and they cannot see me, or excuse me, I cannot hear them. They can hear me. So, and I can't break. So
How do you usually hear them? Do you have a headset?
no, it's just coming through the computer here.
Okay.
Woody,
You're in
maybe,
a Zoom meeting?
Yes.
maybe you can talk to Doug
Okay,
and let
let's-
him know we'll
let's
take a
not worry
break
about
right
this right now.
now
Okay.
Okay.
for 10
All right.
minutes.
I'm almost-
I just
and
wanted
come
to
back.
ask with Kathy that you needed me now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Doug, we're gonna take a 10-minute break for you.
Okay, you're gonna take a break? Is that what I understand?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mhm.
all right.
Okay, so
How about if I reboot?
We're
It
gonna
probably
return-
won't do anything because in preferences, you have to.
I wonder if Doug
you have
can
to
mute
tell- let's
himself.
see, click on
Anyway,
the
let's
speaker down
return
here.
at 9:20.
Meg,
Okay,
I muted him. What, I'm sorry. We're
Oh,
gonna.
good.
Did she
Thank
say
you.
9:20? 9:20?
9:20. Is that enough time, do you think?
I think
them
so,
to-
because
okay.
IT's with him.
All right, 9:20
Okay,
it
thank
is.
you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Woody.
Hey, Nirvana? Can you hear me through the computer? I'm not muted. Oh, I see. We are.
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna hang up Nirvana because we can.
I can hear you, Doug.
I can hear you coming through the computer.
Okay,
There you go.
it sounds like we're back in business. Thank you, sir.
Say something, Nirvana.
It's not Nirvana, but I can say
Oh.
something.
Okay, there you go. The monitors were plugged into the side that has the motion control sensor, and sometimes those go out. So I put it in your uncontrolled side, and you're good.
Thank you, Brian.
You're very welcome. Have a great day.
Okay, I think I am back in business.
Doug, we were gonna take a break till 9:20.
Yeah.
Okay,
I can hear you.
good. Sounds good.
Chair Reeves, I think I'm back in business.
All right, that's good news. I can hear you. You can hear me?
I can
you hear
see
me?
you, I can
All
hear
right.
you.
Good. That's great. You did well continuing on under the circumstances, Doug. I was thinking I would have lost my train of thought, I'm pretty sure.
Those things are always, on some level entertaining because that has never happened to me before in all the Zoom experience. It just happens to be during the director's report.
Right. Well, you're back again. So we might as let us resume where we left off.
Okay, are we ready, Nirvana?
We are ready to go.
Okay. So I was discussing Klamath Basin and executive orders around droughts down there. And the point I was about to make when everything went dark for me was that last year, when we said that we would not be issuing emergency drought permits, we received several requests. We looked at all of them and evaluated the conditions around these requests. And one of them, to the west of Klamath River, was an irrigation district that had very few domestic wells nearby, that the water levels were stable. And we ultimately issued that drought permit for that irrigation district. And it was for a small amount of water, and it ended up being okay. And so we are characterizing it that it is unlikely that we will be issuing any this year, but we will be evaluating conditions as time goes on, and we will look at the requests that do come in. So the next piece on the Klamath, and this is my last item, and again, I apologize for causing us to go so long here. I'll make this quick. And that is that every year we receive a request from the Klamath tribes to regulate on behalf of determined claim KA 622, and that's the determined claim for the lake elevation. So the Klamath tribes have a determined claim for their lake elevation that varies during the year as to what that elevation should be. Historically, we have not regulated water users around Upper Klamath Lake for that lake claim stage for the reason that water was being released from Upper Klamath Lake, and therefore not every effort was being made to withhold the water that was available to maintain that lake stage. And that is how we typically deal with or manage calls on reservoir waters elsewhere in the state. And so we have not regulated on behalf of the tribes for that lake stage. Now we have the decision, and I'm circling back to the UROC decision, where that's very clearly the Bureau of Reclamation has the responsibility to adhere to the Endangered Species Act, and the water releases that the Bureau is releasing downstream for those biological opinion flows are for the endangered species. Therefore, we can no longer consider those releases as being something that is discretionary, if you will. They are releasing them for a mandated purpose. We will then, as a result of this, it is likely, if we receive, and we believe we will receive, a call for the lake stage for Upper Klamath Lake, that we will be regulating water users around Upper Klamath Lake. And significantly, that includes a couple of irrigation districts in the Rogue Basin on the other side of the hill. So that's the Medford Irrigation District and the Rogue River Valley Irrigation District. They store water in the Klamath Basin in 4 Mile Lake and then transport that via canal over into the Rogue Basin to supply their water needs. The water rights that allow them to do that, the claims and water rights that allow them to do that are junior to the tribe's KA 622, and therefore they would be subject to regulation. So I just want to let the commission know of our activities in the Klamath Basin around this upcoming regulation season. And I'll pause there because we are far behind. Questions?
I do not see any hands up, Doug. Wow, that's a lot. You had a lot to report on the Klamath particularly. I guess that's not surprising given the water year and everything else that's going on. But it looks like commissioners do not have questions or comments. Thank you very much for that
Okay.
report.
Thank you for your patience.
So let's go into commissioner comments. I'm going to start myself this morning, which is not typical, but there's a couple of items following up on conversations we had yesterday that I'd like to revisit this morning. One is an issue that's been raised several times by various commissioners. And I'm thinking of this as request to retreat and or I guess, and perhaps have some kind of interaction with other natural resource commissions. So that's one of the items I want to just talk about among the commissioners. And the other is follow up on the Walla Walla management plan conversation that we had yesterday. So if we could start with the kind of request to retreat and also to have some interaction with other natural resource agencies. I also wanted to fold into this Commissioner Lee's observations yesterday, expressing, well, maybe I'd like to, Jan, give you an opportunity to elaborate on the points you were making yesterday about maybe meeting more frequently, being able to do more with other natural resource agencies. So we can talk about the points you were making then too. But let's start with Commissioner Quimps has his hand up, so we'll start there. Eric, did you have some comments about this?
Thank you, Chair Reeves. Yeah, it might have been Commissioner Mall that brought up that idea originally. I can't recall. I think several of us have talked about it. And I had sent a concept, I believe, to you and to Director Woodcock, and I got to thinking about it. I think it's a great idea. I think there's, there's logistical challenges given the size of commissions. And one thought I had is maybe that each commission meets and agrees what issue, what ideas and it wants to bring forward into such a retreat. And then the chair and the director attend, and the chair of each other commission attend, so that it's a more tractable group. Because I think of, we probably should have representation from OWEB, ODA, Land Development Commission to get, better integrate land use planning, ODF and W. And, you start to get a pretty long list of commissioners. And so thinking about logistics, that might be one way to address it. But I think it's a good idea. It's timely, there are tools to focus the discussion, maybe the IWRS, the Water Advisory Report, Tribal Task Force Report, different things that can be used to try to focus the discussion and relate it to some of the tools that the state has. So that's some of my initial thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. I like that. I like the direction you're headed in there. I think it's not feasible for, at least for multiple commissions, to meet as whole commissions. I mean, that's like a conference basically, and it would be harder to get things done. But so the way you propose to kind of scope the issues and then get the meeting happening, I like this idea personally. Any other thoughts on that proposal from other commissioners or from Director Woodcock? Yes, Joe.
I've talked about this a few times with members of the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, and there was great interest in supporting it. And so whether or not there needs to be a special convening of the commissions, and I know there are public meeting laws that need to be considered, but the fact that the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts has a biannual gathering, and similarly the network of Oregon Watershed Councils and the districts have, I forget the acronym, Jan, but there are existing gatherings among practitioners who are dealing with this greater or lesser coordination among agencies pursuing similar goals, that perhaps we could help encourage the design of some of those gatherings to facilitate this. And again, Kelly Beamer, at the head of the Coalition of Oregon Land Trust, was very excited at the prospect and pledged to help any way that they could.
So we could, if we were to pursue this, we could use our June meeting to scope the issues that this commission would want to, or would propose taking up. And we could get input at that meeting from organizations like COLT, other organizations that work in the area, and see what people's thinking is on this. Julie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, and just in general, I am in support of moving forward with this concept, and I think it's very important that we come up with a good scope, a clear scope, so that everyone is very busy, so we get the most out of this meeting or retreat with the natural resource agencies. And so I think that it would be important for us to spend a good amount of time, like you just said, on putting something together at the June meeting, if we're going to move in that direction.
Yeah, and I might almost have suggested a separate meeting for this purpose, but I'm thinking about the legislature being in session and that the way that impacts department staff who work with us basically most directly. So, but Eric and then Jan.
Oh, yes.
Chair Reeves,
Oh, Eric, go ahead.
I think Commissioner Mall brings up a good point, and it makes me think that we need to, if we took some kind of biennial approach, and we need to be thoughtful about, how we schedule that in terms of, legislative sessions, governor's budget and things like that, to try to make it as productive as possible. So just a thought there. Thanks.
Jan?
Yes, Colt is one of the members of the Oregon Conservation Partnership, along with the watershed councils and our soil and water districts. But what I would suggest, or we might talk about, is that we do have this meeting with the chairs and the directors, but that it's a public meeting that others could attend, and maybe there's some public discussion period at the end, so that all of our partners have an opportunity to hear the ideas and perhaps respond to them either later in the meeting or in writing at a future time.
Thank you, Jan. Eric, what were you? I'm just processing your thought too about the timing. Were you thinking that better timing would be during like the second half of, or the last quarter, or not quarter, the last 2 quarters of this biennium that we're in right now, rather than, in other words, budgets are already developed and legislation is underway? Were you thinking maybe try to have some product further out?
Well, those are the considerations I think we need to think about. Do we wait until that information is available and then try to build on that, or do we try to inform that?
Yeah, right.
Those products in advance. So things we could talk about and agree upon as a commission.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think about, well, first, let me circle back to you, Jan, too. You were making a suggestion yesterday that we meet more frequently or that work with other boards and commissions on some specific, I wasn't sure whether you had in mind specific issues that you wanted to get into or what your thinking was on that.
Oh, well, I was just really thinking that we are all embedded in water policy, often in long-term careers, and with the department, we really need to maybe take more leadership in the process. And meeting only quarterly is very difficult to have that kind of leadership. And many of the commissions meet every other month. I'm wondering if we would want to consider more frequent meetings, or if we would establish perhaps some subcommittees to work on specific topics, keeping in mind that we would not have a quorum at those meetings.
Thank you. Julie.
Yeah, I support that idea, Jan, and every other month meetings. And you mentioned something about maybe some of those meetings being Zoom, so we wouldn't always be in person. And I would be in support of that.
So what do the other commissioners think about this? I'm thinking of it. I guess I'd want to have a clearer idea of what we were aiming for in terms of, do we want to get further involved in policy or details than we already are? Partly because, I mean, it's our time, but it's also a heavy lift for the department staff to put on a meeting. So we'd want to have a really purposeful reason for doing this if we were going to undertake it, I guess. Eric, did you have a thought on this?
Yeah, Chair Reeves, thank you. I just want to, I guess, support what you just brought up, and that is, making sure we have the need for the meetings and considering the impacts to staff. Maybe looking over the course of a biennium and trying to map out what we're trying to accomplish in that biennium, and what's realistic with the department's resources, and seeing if we can do the bi-monthly format or have the subcommittees that could be more active. So thanks.
Woody, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I haven't been on the commission very long, but I sort of look at this as a misstructure and procedure, possibly, as far as the way that the commission receives information. Typically, I don't think allows us enough time to weigh in on the process as a collective to guide the department's direction. And we seem to, I think we get information in our timeline of process that sort of inhibits the ability for our thoughts to come forth in the progress moving forward. And so I am a huge supporter of more meetings with structure ahead of the meetings of what we'll be talking about, and trying to create anticipation in where the department's going, instead of sort of, well, for example, we're expected to approve the Division 10 in June, which we have to do to meet a deadline. And I think that we really haven't yet had the opportunity to completely understand what we're supposed to be approving. And so I would be in favor of increased meetings and a different timeline on the informational process that the commission receives, so that those meetings can hear our voice in time for the department to work it into the equation.
Okay. Jan, you have your hand up.
Well, I was just going to say what Woody so well said, so I don't need to repeat it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, so maybe the thing to do is take what we've just talked about, and Doug and I will talk about structuring making time on the agenda in the June meeting to get further into this because there's a lot to talk about here. And I just kind of wanted to get it out there on the table for today, but and talk more about what, if any, kinds of changes we want to make about how we're doing business right now and what else we'd like to try to accomplish as a commission and how we'd like to try to do that. So is that acceptable to you all to kind of go away, think about this, try to bring some structure to it and bring it back with enough time on the agenda that we can have a in-depth conversation about it? That work? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. So the second item I wanted to talk about is the conversation we had yesterday about the Walla Walla work. And that we left yesterday's meeting agreeing that we'd like to, though we are not, for a lot of reasons, we're not at this point being asked to approve the plan that we were presented with yesterday. We would like to make some affirmative statement of support for the effort that's underway there. And you all received by email this morning exactly that, basically a statement of support for the work that's happening in the basin. And if y'all have had time to look at that, I guess I'd like to get some feedback. Do you all think that this is the kind of thing that will work for your, whatever in your heads about what you wanted to be saying about this? Does it reflect that, I guess, is a question. Yes, Kathy.
Yeah, I really appreciated the time you spent wordsmithing that because it was succinct and definitely states that, yes, we support what's going on. We're fully behind it. And I think that kind of captures the feeling and the enthusiasm, but like you say, not confusing things with our, state approval of a plan.
Recognition. Yeah. Okay. And I think that I expect that we're going to be hearing a lot more about the work in the Walla Walla Basin, and this is not going to be our last opportunity to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I would certainly hope so.
Okay. Well, if there's no other conversation about this, I would entertain a motion to, we could even just recite this, the substance of this statement into the motion. If you all have it. Is there anyone who would like to move to approve this statement?
Let me see if I can pull it up on my phone so I can get it right.
Okay. Or maybe I've got it right in front of me. How about if I do this? Can we get a motion to approve the statement of the Water Resources Commission that reads, following the February 23rd, 2023 presentation by the Oregon Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and states of Washington and Oregon, the Oregon Water Resources Commission fully supports the ongoing efforts of bi-state integrated water resources management in the Walla Walla Basin. So that would be the motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Eric.
I'll second. We all second.
Everybody second. Well, say Commissioner Smitherman seconds, and then I'll just take the roll. Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Lee. Sorry, my voice is going.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Smitherman.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Wolf.
Yes.
Commissioner Kihara.
Yes.
Commissioner Mall.
Yes.
Commissioner Quimps.
Yes.
And yes from Commissioner Reeves. Thank you all. And I have taken up enough time in commissioner comments. So let's move on to Commissioner Lee.
Oh, okay. I'll get unmuted here so I can say something. Usually I don't have too much to say about drought or weather up in the Northwest region, but while the governor has already had to approve drought declarations in Central Oregon early this year, the Northwest region still remains moderately wet. And in fact, Portland had its second highest accumulation of snow on record in a single day this week. We had 10.8 inches of snow on one day. The only time that record has been higher was once 80 years ago. But water issues are still predominant statewide, and we talked about the audit, we talked about what we can do to be more involved. And so I strongly endorse all that we've defined as pathways where we can provide more leadership and assistance to the department in looking at things in the long run. The Western States Water Council provides a repository of policy issues among the Western states. And I wondered if maybe at some point we might ask someone from the council to come and talk to us about the array of other states' policies, just so we could see if there are any tools that might be effective for us to consider that we haven't already. So that's the extent of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Commissioner Smitherman?
Yes, thank you, Chair Reeves. Well, like Jan said, we have also gotten snow, not as much as Portland area, but we have down here in Southern Oregon, the Southwest region, we have received quite a bit of snow in the last week, which is exciting. We have been in a drought for several years. This is helping. Reservoirs are at a level higher than they were at this time last year, so that's encouraging. However, we still do need quite a bit more to get us back to what we would consider normal, which I think that word normal is shifting as well. So everyone is getting prepared for what the summer season will hold for us. One thing that's happening locally is there is a water rights agreement, intergovernmental agreement between several of the communities here in our Rogue Valley region, where each of those communities has come together to share their water rights. And within that plan, there's also an effort now to create a regional water efficiency program. So currently only a couple of the communities here offer incentives or programs related to water efficiency and conservation. And what this plan is aiming to do is to expand that in order to help the neighboring communities as well. So it's a really great collaborative approach to water challenges in our region. And it's been great to see that collaboration between all of the different groups coming together. Also with the presentation that was given yesterday about the Southwest region, in particular Jackson County and Josephine County, I just wanted to mention again that the work that's being done on enforcement and as far as illicit cannabis and water rights violations go, I think that that's been a huge push and a big challenge and effort being taken on by the department. And I just want to say that I'm grateful for the work that's being done in our area. And I know that there are many people who are grateful that work is being done and continues to move forward. We do have a lot of really great work being done on our Rogue Basin Watershed Council, Rogue River Watershed Council, excuse me. We also have a Rogue Basin Drinking Water Partnership group, and these groups are focused on water quality of the Rogue River, restoration, monitoring, and a big piece is source water protection. And we have a couple of watersheds, the Rogue River Watershed, the Big Butte Springs Watershed, that serve that supplies water to upward of 200,000 people. And it's really important to protect that source. And so there's a lot of plans in place moving forward to develop good, solid working plans to address some of those issues that could potentially impact our water sources. So a lot of collaborative work, and just grateful for all the interest in water issues. It's very complex, and we've got several community organizations being developed because of the interest in water. And so again, just really proud of our area for coming together like this. It's baby steps, but I think we're moving in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Commissioner Wolf?
Yes. I've been contemplating what to say for my comments for a while, and I guess I'll just start with a little bit of weather from my specific area. In November and December, snowpack was well above normal, and then a drier January and February. I think we're approaching or slightly below normal now. Not sure what the recent storms that moved through, how they've affected that number. Optimistic that the Wallowa Lake Dam will continue to move forward, although inflation has started to throw a hiccup in that. The money that was appropriated now is not going to be near enough. So I think they're succeeding at overcoming that challenge, but not completely up to date on exactly where that's at. I would like to thank the department for moving the commissioner comments a little bit later, so we have time to reflect on some of the things that have happened. And I do appreciate the process change, and I might also recommend that within moving forward, Jan mentioned getting some information on other states' policies to see if there are any useful tools that we could weigh in on the implementation of. And I might also suggest that having been a commissioner or a board member on multiple different entities, probably not near as many as most of my colleagues, possibly a review of exactly the design function of this commission and how that process works, so that we have a clear path of our role and how to maximize the effectiveness of that in conjunction with the leadership at the department. So I'm optimistic of the direction that we're going, and relative to the uncertain times that we're in, I think we need to put our foot on the gas in that direction. And unfortunately, I believe that will, with a growing demand and a shrinking supply of the resource we're in charge of, I think that will lead to more marginally popular decisions relative to one's perspective. And I think we just need to push through that and continue forward with what as a collective the commission believes is correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Woody. Appreciate that. Commissioner Kahara?
That's what I get for punching the wrong button. In any case, kind of building on what everybody has said, I'll start with the weather. We're getting some actual weather here this last week. As usual, winter, holds off and decides to arrive sometime in late February and March, just when we all got our hopes up for spring. Drought, of course, is continuing to rear its ugly head in Central Oregon. Crook Jefferson and now Deschutes, or, the Tri-County area has all made at least county drought declarations. This is probably the earliest that has come forth. But in other hopeful news, we saw the first stock water run in Central Oregon Irrigation District in a couple of years. Happened this last week. So there must be thoughts of some more water available, or desperation of our ranchers has made that possible. Thinking a lot on what we're doing for groundwater, state planning, wondering, getting kind of philosophical about, okay, how do we best manage this resource for the entire state? I keep getting comments about, well, Central Oregon is different, and so don't make rules that hurt Central Oregon. Yes, but we have to think statewide, and that's kind of a challenge because not everybody can think that way. I wonder about water security, food security. Are we getting water to the people that need it the most? How do we prioritize things? And is that really where part of what this commission is supposed to do? I'm very much in favor of meeting more often, a half-day meeting via Zoom more often, I think could probably really help us wrestle with some of these issues. And it's going to be a long, hot summer, and I'm not really looking forward to it. And those are my comments for the day.
Thank you, Cassie. Commissioner Mall.
I'm looking forward to summer. I look forward to all seasons. I understand your sentiment, Commissioner Chiara. Before I forget, I love Commissioner Wolf's marginally popular decisions idea. I think that if we brace ourselves for making those, that's a reasonable way to start the day with coffee. I was on I'm on an angling mailing list, and last night some of these anglers were all excited about the snowpack report. They'd gotten into the state's report, and very specifically we're tracking things and comparing notes over the years and looking ahead. And at the end of the day, certainly hunting and angling is a big economic driver in the state, but these are guys that are, quite frankly, they're going to be inconvenienced if they can't fish when they want to, where they want to. And then you look at much of the language around what we've discussed these last couple of days, and especially in some of the planning groups, these questions of water security, and just making sure that we have what we've had in the past and can plan accordingly. And then you get further down the line, and people, I think, consider the people that whose livelihoods and, quite frankly, lives at times are truly threatened. I think often these days about the folks at Warm Springs and the degree to which their drinking water system has collapsed and needs significant help, and is getting that. But so we have this incredible range of inconvenience to truly threatened, with security right there in the middle. And again, I can never overlook the degree to which OWRD staff and other agency staff are shouldering a truly wicked problem. It's remarkable what you're able to do, and I want to thank all of the staff for that. I was on the Deschutes last week for just a simple President's Day holiday, playing in the snow, and we rented a house, and we were very close. We were on a little side channel to the Deschutes, but looking out at it, and an otter popped up, and we were sitting in a hot tub. And it just dawned on me there too, that, okay, I'm enjoying a recreational property in an area that is severely water limited. And this is an area, I think I mentioned yesterday, that 20 years ago did not have housing. This was farmland, agricultural land that has gone through tremendous change. And one of those neighborhoods that's got the wonderfully reminiscent something meadow or heron rookery meadow or something like that. That's a reflection of its past. And I get it. I was there. I paid money. I'm a user of water and land, but it just drove home for me again, something you hear me harp on all the time. I feel like we're chasing our tails with water because we aren't getting ahead of the land use questions and our decisions around how land is used. I was as I mentioned, very intrigued and encouraged by what folks in the Walla Walla have done with their plan. And I'm glad, thank you again, Chair Reeves, for making it something that we can formally support. But again, because of the specificity of their desired future conditions, I think, and so much, even yesterday, and the planning work that was done and presented over the last year, really high level generalities of essentially agreeing to work collaboratively together. And a lot of time and money and effort went into reaching that agreement. And those agreements are important, but they're only a first step. And so the specificity of desired future conditions is something that I really hope that we can begin to pursue, because I think that they will help us refine our thinking, get down to the meat of the matter, and move forward, make some decisions like they seem to be doing well in the Walla Walla. I will say I went back later and was just wondering, I was thinking, I don't know my geography that well, but I was in Walla Walla last year, and the Tri-Cities area has boomed in the last 20, 25 years. Walla Walla was about 45 minutes to an hour away from that. And over the last 20 to 30 years, their population is pretty flat. It really hasn't changed that much. The economic drivers are changing, and even within agricultural itself, which has been such a driver, the kind of agriculture there is changing. The land uses are changing. But in some ways, it's an easier thing to plan for water use in an area where at least the population change isn't as dramatic as it is, for example, in the Deschutes. And so I just end by again encouraging us to, whenever we can, take one step back from the water issue at hand and see what the land use nexus is, because I think that ultimately is going to be more beneficial for us to get ahead of some of these things and try to get away from not playing to not lose, but really trying to play to win for a desired future condition that's going to outlive all of us. Love working with you all. I can't wait to get back together in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Commissioner Quimps.
Thank you, Chair Reeves. First of all, I'd like to thank the staff for their work. Director Woodcock has pointed out in the past couple of meetings about the additional resources that the department has benefited from recently, and we can see that turning into work and work products, and that's great to see. We saw the field services report, the OIT GIS, records management, the Walla Walla 2050 plan, which is not only collaborative, but as Commissioner Mall points out, has specific desired future conditions, and it's a pretty great product to look at, very thorough. So we're seeing resources being used wisely. I think some of that goes back to the internal planning exercise that occurred under Director Byler at the time. I think that kind of process where it's more inward looking to the department may not feel very satisfying, but I think it helps when resources like this become available to have had that planning exercise and to know where those resources are going to go. So I want to commend the staff for that, past and present. Thinking about the Oregon Water Advisory Report, which is an imperfect product, and I think Commissioner Mall's point is a good one, that it doesn't acknowledge some of the legal challenges that the department wrestles with and how under-resourced they are there. but from what I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners, we do need to think about different user groups, different water uses, disadvantaged communities, and how we prioritize water use in a future that's going to have a lot of variability around it. And I always harp on variability because I think it's going to be critical to measure that and to factor that into our decision making. So how do we take care of those communities that may not have safe drinking water when there's competing demands for water development, and protect existing rights holders, and thinking that a lot of those disadvantaged communities don't have the resources for legal services that may be necessary in these kind of debates and decisions. One of the tools I keep hoping will be helpful in all of this with the prior administration's emphasis on a 100-year vision. I don't know where the Kotek administration is going to be on that. I know there's an emphasis on education and housing, homelessness, and I understand that, but I'm hoping that we can somehow carry that 100-year vision concept forward and create some more durable programs that will address some of these needs and the diverse needs of underserved communities, in-stream flows, recreation. And so, maybe we'll need to help be a voice to carry a concept like that forward and see that it has things like desired future conditions that are specific and actionable. So, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Just a quick wrap up. I think I'm hearing some desire, I guess, to be less reactive and try to get ahead more. And some of the reactivity that you're feeling, I'm feeling it too, is the result of the kind of Byzantine water process that puts us at the end of very long processes and has us making a decision after literally years have gone by with people working on an issue. And it's not a great position to be in, but that's where we are for some of these issues. But it doesn't have to be like that for everything that could be within the commission's purview. So I think we have, I'm really happy to hear this conversation and having the opportunity to get some of this out in the open from people about what you're thinking about this. And we will work on getting this on a future agenda to try to get at some of the things that you're talking about. I appreciate all of you. I wish we were in person. Okay, next item, which we are behind schedule. I apologize to the presenters. This is an IWRS progress report and outreach and engagement planning. We have Crystal Grinnell and Wendy Willis presenting. There's Crystal and Wendy. Again, I apologize for we got way behind this morning already, so I'm sorry. But you have the floor.
Crystal, there you go. Crystal, you're muted if you're talking.
Okay, can you hear me now? Right?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so let me start from the beginning here. So I'm here today I'm Crystal Grinnell. I'm the IWRS specialist, and I'm here today to discuss the progress report that we did last fall. So we were looking at the progress that had been made on the integrated water strategies from that window between 2017 when it was published until just this last fall. So just as a reminder for everyone, the strategy goals are really quite simple, just two main goals. One is to understand our water resources, and the other is to meet those resources. And that's considering many different types of needs, so in-stream and out-of-stream and ecosystem. And just to kind of base, before I launch into the progress report description, I just wanted to ground us in the framework for the strategy. So as a reminder, we've got those overarching goals, and then we have 4 objectives. We've got several critical issues, and we have recommended actions. And so the bulk of what I was looking at with this progress report is drilling down to the recommended action level. So that's a big part of what I was looking at, just viewing what recommended actions have received some action and what agencies were completing those actions. So let's just discuss a bit about why we did a progress report. I think it's helpful to communicate success and understand what's been done, and to understand gaps where we weren't as successful as we would have liked to have been. And then another important piece is that this is a really foundational update, a foundational piece of information for the update. So right now we're starting the 5-year update process. We're doing that this year. And just gathering all of this information was a really helpful point to understand what has been done and maybe where we didn't make as much progress as we would have liked to. So the methodology for this progress report, it was all of the data collection was occurring this fall, so just within about a 2 to 3 month window of time. The focus was just on the Natural Resource Cabinet agencies plus Business Oregon and Oregon Health Authority, because there is a nexus there with the water projects and funding that they do. And a primary source of information was the Water Core team. So I had access to the 14 different agencies that attend that meeting, and they were incredibly helpful in both answering questions that I had, but also sending me to the right people to get more information about what needed to be included in the progress report. And then of course, agency websites were another way to supplement the information that I was looking at. So let's talk a little bit about the interagency accomplishments. So these are just really the high level accomplishments that showed a lot of collaboration across multiple agencies. So in the progress report, we've got, these are kind of the very first summary items that you'll see, where we're highlighting types of work that had at least 2 or more agencies involved. So the groundwater and surface water data collection, that had a lot of action by ODA, DEQ, ODFW, and WRD. Items underneath that would be like ODFW was doing in-stream monitoring, DEQ has got their environmental data management system, ODA has their water quality pesticide management team monitoring system, and WRD has our groundwater monitoring. And we also completed the Harney Basin groundwater study within this time window. We also identified that the water data portal had kicked off. And so that project is not something that has been completed yet. It's in its very early stages of scoping, but it's a key piece that's been identified, a problem that has been ongoing for a long time, just having so many different agencies collecting water-related data, but the need for having it centralized in one location, one public single source point of access is what that data portal is responding to. So that there was actually just a report completed this last month that talks about the next steps on that project. So again, just it's in the very early stages. Drought planning and support, a lot of grants associated with that. So WRD had the water well replacement, repair, and abandonment fund for that one. And then there were also ODFW had some funding for fish passage, and OWEB had their drought relief grants. And conservation and ecological restoration, I had a few things I wanted to mention on that. In that category, DEQ did have the Waldo and Crater Lake designated as outstanding resource waters. OPRD and OWRD partnered on a portion of the Nehalem River receiving the Scenic Waterway designation, and the OWEB also had restoration, always as usual, has restoration grants that really move the needle there in terms of conservation and ecological restoration. And of course, we've got ODA that supports soil and water conservation districts as well. So a lot of projects happening within those areas. And finally, the pesticide stewardship partnership. That's a nice, I think, example of where agencies are working with landowners to make significant change in water quality. So there's monitoring that's occurring within that partnership. Watershed councils are also involved, but it's a way to see measurable improvements in water quality in a non-compliance environment. Those are the key items I wanted to talk about. And then just overall, what I was seeing, just to kind of take a high level picture of the progress report, the success that I was seeing over that 5-year window. So that 2021 legislative funding supported many interagency accomplishments. So when I was tracking what agency was accomplishing which recommended action, I really saw a huge bump in activity that happened around 2021 and early 2022. Only 2 of the 51 recommended actions did not have any accomplishments. That doesn't mean that there isn't something to work from there. So one of those is the permitting and interagency permitting guide that hasn't been updated since 2012. But one of our recommended actions is to regularly update that. So that might be due for an update soon. And then something else I was saying was a really strong connection between the agency requested budgets and the IWRS recommended actions. So at the time that I was doing this progress report, I started in on this in August and September. That was when all of the agencies were really, had just submitted their agency requested budgets. So we were cross-referencing what those budgets were addressing in terms of IWRS recommended action. So that's, there are 2 tables towards the end of the progress report that summarize what those POPs were and what recommended actions they address. And then area for improvement. So funding, I found that funding to support water management responsibilities or water infrastructure has been very irregular over this time period. We're also seeing that there is a large difference in resources that are applied for folks to implement the IWRS. So meaning that certain agencies have more resources than others to implement actions and to honestly just track that progress. Another thing that I see room for improvement on is the work plan development component. So the whole idea with this strategy is that it's a very large blueprint. It's a big strategy. It's trying to get multiple agencies across the state to make progress towards water problems, but to drill down to the level of prioritizing these actions and assigning resources. That's where work plans come in. And so that's the next step after an IWRS is done. Work plans need to be developed and then continued and ongoing. And so I saw a change between the first IWRS and the second one, this 2017 one. I wasn't seeing a lot of those interagency work plans being developed and acted upon. And tracking and communicating progress. So this is an area where, there wasn't already a system in place to track these actions on 14 different agencies. So I was creating that process as I did this progress report. And it gave me a lot of ideas about how we might need to build that into what agencies are doing to make it a little bit less of a separate activity and a little bit more of our kind of ongoing work. So overall, after doing this progress report, the recommendations that came forward to me thinking about the next IWRS is to establish an expectation for agencies to create those work plans. So I think that the IWRS does talk about work plans. It's not really hit home in a big way. And I think that there's more work to be done in that category there, and to get agencies in the same room to work on the interagency work plans and make sure that they do tie back to those recommended actions. And then, of course, finding more ways to track and communicate the agency roles and accomplishments. Agency roles regarding water has been something that we've heard a lot about from stakeholders and the public, just trying to understand this unique structure that we have in Oregon. And I think that IWRS provides a really unique opportunity to do that, to clearly identify agency roles regarding water. And of course, to also reflect back what our accomplishments are and what the agencies are doing to move the water, work on water problems. And then the final thing was to continue support for the 2021 legislative water investment. So because I'm seeing all of this huge growth in activity towards these recommended actions, some of them were one-time investments, and some of them hopefully will be more of an ongoing thing, starting of a new program or a new initiative that hopefully will receive continuing funding. And so now just to move on to what's next. So a lot of this, again, the whole purpose of really doing this progress report was to provide a foundation for our next IWRS update. And we're working on that now. Right now, we're still working on the planning and the outreach and engagement planning. So I've got someone from Oregon's Kitchen Table here today. So as soon as I'm done with this presentation, we will hear from Wendy Wellis at Oregon's Kitchen Table. And she'll talk through some of these items here, these interviews and the survey, and some of the activities that we're planning to do in the outreach. But aside from that, I wanted to mention to the commission, I think it would be ideal if we could have a very targeted work session with the commission just discussing the IWRS, and I'm hoping to do that at the June meeting. I think just timing wise, we will be wrapping up the public outreach and engagement window. We will not have a final report yet from the Oregon's Kitchen Table about what we heard, but that would just timing wise, I think that would be an excellent time to hear from the commission and have a work session to work through some of the details. And then just another piece about the schedule. So with the public outreach and engagement generally planned for May and June of this year, we'll be working on draft development during the summer, and then we'll have public review and comment windows in the fall. And we've decided to have 2 of those. So we'll have one hopefully in around October and another one in early January. And that would mean that we would need to adopt the next version of the IWRS probably in early 2024, just to make sure that we get that time for both comment windows to be addressed. Right, are there any questions about what I've presented?
Crystal, could you take the screen share down?
Yes.
Or is that going to complicate okay, just for
if that works.
Question.
Yeah, my screen share.
Let me see if I have any hands up here. Raquel, I see you have your hand up.
Chair Reeves, Commissioners, for the record, Raquel Rancière, Deputy Director of Strategy and Administration. Crystal, you are still sharing your screen. You need to hit the little green button at the bottom, because now we just see you have a very clear desktop compared to mine. So that's wonderful. But we can see it.
Where
it's
is it?
Green right now. So,
okay, thank you. I can't find it, but yes, I will. I don't know why everything has collapsed.
So I just wanted to note for the commission, we do have, it is in the governor's recommended budget. It is POP, I think 101. It's our #1 POP, which is to continue the integrated water resources strategy position, which Crystal is currently in, and it is a limited duration role. And I think as you hear Crystal talk about budgets as well as interagency coordination, tracking of implementation, one of the areas that has in development of work plans, the area that we have lacked resources in is to continue to do that, because the agency just hasn't had the capacity. That the folks that have worked on the IWRS, they've been charged with doing multiple things and not just the IWRS. And really our goal, and Crystal has just been working on the IWRS, which has been wonderful, because really that's what we need. We need someone that is able to convene the agencies on a regular basis to talk about work plans and to talk about implementation and be able to track that and communicate that out. And we just haven't had that capacity. And so that is why we have really sought to secure a permanent full-time position that is dedicated to just this work, instead of, as you all know, we're really good at it piling on multiple duties on one person. And that just hasn't really lent to success for such a big ask, which is the integrated water resources strategy. So that is in the governor's budget. We will be talking with the legislature about that. And hopefully that provides you with some additional context as to the background of where we've identified a particular need to make this successful across agencies. And Crystal, you're still showing your screen for some
Thank you,
reason.
Raquel. I can see hands up
I
and people do it
apologize.
electronically.
I
I
can
have a
see the
question.
meeting controls, but I can't get them. I'm sorry. There we go.
I'll just ask a question while you're working on that. I'm curious whether, I like the way that you connected the policy option packages with the strategy. And I just wonder whether any of that, is there any transfer to the legislative process? Like when agencies are pitching their pops, I guess, for lack of a better word, either with the governor's office or in the legislative process, are they identifying how it serves the state's integrated water resources strategy?
Yes, many of them are. And something that we've talked about to make that more, I think, timely is just the timing of the IWRS in terms of when we can get the IWRS update to happen and when folks are creating work plans and POPs, you know, all of that planning and budgeting together. Ideally, that would be happening pretty seamlessly.
Yeah. It would be nice to see that link across the executive and the legislative branch, basically, you know, having significance in all those processes. But, yeah. Okay, let me just see. I do not see any other hands up. If any commissioners up, yeah, Commissioner Lee.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate all this work. And I don't think that the legislature really understands how all of the agencies are actively working together and hearing what's going on. I attend a lot of hearings on natural resources, and they could certainly learn a lot from a presentation. And I'm sure Raquel probably shares that with me. Thank you.
A presentation, just general on that cross-agency work on, is that what you mean, Jan? On the IWRS specifically?
And how it's related to the IWRS.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I don't think we have other questions at this point. Shall we move on to the next portion of the presentation?
Good morning, Chair Reeves and commissioners. I'm really glad to be with you. My name is Wendy Willis. I'm the director of Oregon's Kitchen Table, and we're a statewide community engagement organization at Portland State University in the Hatfield School. So I'm going to spend a couple of seconds trying to get my slides up and try not to be too clumsy about it. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Great. So I'll try not to take too much of your time because I'd love to have some dialogue with all of you, but we're super excited to be with you today and just talk a little bit about the upcoming engagement strategy. I'll talk a little bit just about Oregon's Kitchen Table so you know who we are before, and then go into a few of the details about what we see upcoming. Oregon's Kitchen Table is a statewide platform to get input into public decisions, and we've done public decision making work at sort of every level. So everything from statewide to tiny projects. We in unincorporated parts of counties, East Wasco County Recreation District, we did a project with, and then we just finished a statewide project on high school graduation requirements. And so we use a combination of online and in-person events to try to meet the needs of each community and to determine how people want to participate and what makes sense for them. We have a particular focus on getting input from people who feel like they can't participate or haven't participated before. or, been excluded for some reason. And, it's very super rewarding because those folks have a lot to offer. One of the examples that we often use is we were involved in place-based water planning in the Mid-Coast project. And there's a lot of folks who are either Spanish speaking or Mam speaking, that one of the indigenous languages of Guatemala in that region, working in hotels. And there was so much wisdom from those people about water conservation because they came from water constrained environments. So they just had a lot of really smart thinking about water use. And so they're, and I think that the agency and the collaborative learned a lot from that. So quickly, I'll talk a little bit about what informs our thinking. So we sort of have these sets of values. There's a lot of adaptation in the middle of a process, but this sort of is what we bring to the table is, we believe if the community members have a good experience, it'll be better outcomes for everyone, the decision makers. And it has there'll be a long-term benefit of relationships between the decision makers and the community. Of course, as I just mentioned, expanding engagement, hearing from communities that have been left out before, thinking about what representation. So we all, when we start a process, we always look at the demographics of the community, and in this case, the state, and make sure that if we adapt as the process goes along. So if we think, oh, we're just not hearing from a certain group of people, we actually pivot during the process to make sure that we are able to hear from folks that are representative at least of some communities. We also know that there's capacity in the communities that we want to both amplify and sort of like leave behind civic capacity. And so we really work with folks to say, what do you want to learn? How do you want to do this? And give them a long lead on being able to do that. And then, of course, as I just mentioned, we try to adapt while we're working, and then we've adapted between processes. Sorry about the bells. I'm actually caring for a family member that just finished surgery, so I'm at my parents' house. So you'll hear their grandfather clock. So sorry about that. And then we just think it's fun, right? Like let's make this fun, right? So if there's meals involved, we've done tons of festivals where we're out talking to people in places where it's joyful. It doesn't seem like it's so serious so that it feels like it's a place for everyone. So that's sort of what informs what we do. And then for the purposes of this project, there is a framework that we've had many conversations with Raquel and Crystal and their team, and we'll continue to refine the precise locations. But as Crystal just mentioned, right now our team is in the midst of community connector interviews, and that's a series of 20 to 30 interviews with individuals or small groups where we talk to people about how the people in their community are talking about water, like what are their interests in it, how are they talking about it, so that as we go out into engagement, that's connecting with things that we know that people already care about, and then what's coming up that we could tap into. Are there events? Are there locations where people are gathering that we can connect to that and have this process be sort of seamless with what's already going on. And then we'll take that information back and start to really refine the details of the process. We knew that if we had used all those community connector interviews for what we were calling engaged stakeholders, so folks who you already have relationships with, that would have taken all those interviews. So there's a few sessions with those engaged stakeholders who already have a lot of knowledge to get their sense of what's upcoming as well. Then the next thing, we're just starting to sort of say, what are the issues? What would be beneficial for this group of agencies to hear from the community, and talk and to sort of start to design what the questions will be in both in-person and online environments. And then soon we'll work on a survey that'll be online and paper in 8 languages. There'll be some larger community conversations where anyone can come, but there'll also be a lot of like really culturally specific conversations where we work with organizers who say, you know, I'm going to go to a Zumba class in a church and talk to the folks after that and get their sense of this. Or I'm going to, you know, my youth group is having a litter pickup day, and we'll talk about water while we do that. So it's a really, really small, detail-oriented set of activities. And then following that, as Crystal mentioned, there'll be some larger regional conversations where probably more of the engaged stakeholders will come to those. Anyone's welcome, but usually those tend to draw people who already have a lot of knowledge. And then we'll take all that information, look at it, analyze it, look to see where there's big themes and look to see where there's divergences. So like, oh, this community, there's differences in how these communities look at these things, whether those communities are geographic or communities of interest. And then of course, we'll share it back with you all, we'll share it back with the agencies, and we'll post it and we'll send it to the people who participated. And then we'll post it online. So that's kind of a year's worth of process described in a few minutes. But I wanted to give you a sense of, you know, as you can imagine, this kind of detailed engagement, it sort of takes a village to do it, and it takes all of us activating our networks. And so there's a few places where, you know, commission members would be super useful to the process. One is we're working on drafting these questions both for the in-person and online. And it's really, really helpful to us to have a wide variety of people look at those questions. And so if any commissioners want to be involved in that process, we'd welcome that participation. And then once we get to the point where we're actually in the field, you know, you all have such a broad geographic and community reach. We welcome any ideas like there's a festival, there's a parade, there's something in my community we'd like you to be at, and we'll get someone there. And then of course, inviting your own communities to participate, encouraging them to participate. There's nothing like an invitation from someone you know or respect to drive participation. Just a random email from me or one of our team members, you know, that just doesn't have the same impact as being invited by someone you know and respect. And then of course, when we get to the regional conversations, you may well want to hear from people themselves. And so attending those and engaging in dialogue might be very satisfying and interesting to you. So that's it for now. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have, or ideas, or critiques, whatever you'd like to offer.
Thank you, Wendy. Do we have any questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Mall?
Thank you both, Wendy and Crystal. I'm glad you ended with that slide, because that was actually the question I was going to ask both of you. And I think you were both on the line during our previous deliberation prior to this. We were talking about gathering more often, gathering with agencies and things. So I'm curious, your jobs, or especially yours, Wendy, is that first part of the IWRS is identify the needs. And as you heard us discussing, we're a little frustrated and trying to figure out what can we do better to take it into and support the next part. After needs have been identified, how do you provide all this? It's a wicked problem. I guess what I'm asking for is your professional opinion, your perspective, a little deeper on, and this goes beyond what you're being asked to do, more to perhaps to yours, Crystal. How do we do that? How do we go, how do we not get what I think often happens with so much public outreach, paralysis analysis when it comes to implementing it? Because it becomes, quite frankly, I think overwhelming from anyone in the field trying to resolve, to provide a very limited resource to an increasing number of voices. So thoughts on that? Where you've seen it most effective to deal with that feedback that can be really exciting, but quite frankly leads to, or more often demand less insightful perspective on limited supply. What do we do?
Crystal, do you want to speak to that? And then I have a couple thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just speak to just kind of the ideal scenario would be that when moving into work plans, that would be an opportunity for the public to have some input on the priority setting piece. And so I see that kind of that bridge there between this big effort to talk about the IWS and kind of update it, but then to move into action, that being a space where folks can continue to have input there. I also think that we could do a better job of communicating back out to the public what is happening right now. And I feel like a web portal could be really valuable in that regard. So it keeps all of that work that has been done and that information that's been gathering, it's showing that it's being acted upon and keeping things up to date and refreshed in terms of what's happening in those regards. And that could also be a good place for people to always know to go for that kind of information. And if there are interim, meetings that could be collected about a specific issue, folks would be able to find out about that. So, Wendy, do you have some other things to add?
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. I mean, I think some of what Crystal said was what I was going to say too. I mean, I think it's really, I think, really essential from the beginning to put folks in a trade-off frame of mind, right? So that to recognize that there are trade-offs, and I think that's and prioritization. So you can engage people in your problems. One of the very first projects we did was the state budget, which was a ridiculous project to do for the very first project we ever went out on. But we were in a public event and I was sitting with, I think I can name him. I was sitting with Dennis Richardson, and this woman said to the woman sitting next to her, "Gosh, this is really hard." And he said back to me, "It's all worth it now." and I think just like that, like getting folks to say, like, we're all on the same side of this, right? That we have to make decisions together. People will welcome that kind of frankness. So that's sort of one thing. But other thing that I really loved about place-based water planning was some of how they wanted to frame the questions on Midcoast, at least, was to think about what can you do to participate in this plan? Like, how can you be an actor, not just an advisor to the plan? And that might be another phase of this, but that kind of framing as like we all have our part to play was really interesting, and people had a lot to thought a lot about that. So I know there's clearly things that only agencies can do and only the state can do, but there are things that community members can do, and putting them in that position is better for everybody, right? It was really quite inspiring, actually, on the Midcoast.
Thank you. I'm particularly intrigued, and do you mind elaborating just a teeny bit more on how you put people in a trade-off frame of mind? Because I think that's a crux issue that really is not easy. Yeah,
it's a forced choice. Like, you put them in forced choices, right? Like you just sort of replicate where you are, and to sort of say, like, I'll use an example from another project, which was another budget project. And we actually realized we put people in some forced choice questions around corrections. And folks, when they started to deliberate about like where money should go in corrections, it became really clear that like just throwing people in jail was not what they wanted to do when resources were on the table. Like, if it's meant, if I'm putting money into prisons, it's taking money away from education. Like, looking to see what that felt like. People were very reasonable, rational about saying, okay, I see what these, I can see what the trade-offs are. And so it might not be money, it might be time. It might, and just whatever those things are. We sort of think of it as a funnel, right? Like, we start with people really broadly about their experience, like what's your experience with water? What are your feelings about water? And as they get more confident throughout either a survey or a conversation, then you can't make a million forced choice questions, but you can have a few, right? Where you're like, okay, here's the trade-off moment. And they'll be willing to do it by the end. At the beginning, they're like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know enough about this. This is a trick. But as you go through it, as they get warmed up, they get pretty good at it. Does that answer your question?
No, it's great. It's very helpful. Madam Chair, it reminds me of something that I forgot to mention in my comments that I think is relevant to this is, if I remember correctly, it's been now 2 years or at least a year and a half since we essentially shifted the baseline of what we call normal snowpack, where we went from something based on the 30-year average from the late 50s to the early 80s, shifting forward to the average from the 80s into the 2000s, which is a lower average. So normalcy is now physically a lesser amount of snow and water equivalent. I think I'm remembering that correctly, but I think that's the kind of thing that makes it difficult for people to come to this position of recognizing trade-offs, because the sense of normalcy, you don't get that reminder that, wait a minute, it's a new normal. It's a smaller bucket of water available. So just wanted to flag that. Wendy, I really, really like that insight, and it's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Have other questions? I am seeing none. Thank you both really for your presentation and for your work on this. And one question I had actually was whether the regional conversations, when they start to happen, it was, Wendy, you suggested that was one way that commissioners might want to participate. Is there a listserv that we should be on that we're not on, or how would we know about those things?
Oh, there will be.
Okay, all right, great.
So once those are sort of set, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And it's also, sorry about that. It's also really fun to be out at events. And so if we have organizers out at events, we'll let you know. And if you wanted to just come stand around the, fair at a table, it's actually really fun to talk to people, and you learn a ton from those conversations. So anything you want to do, we'll take the labor.
Okay.
and we'll make sure that you know about those opportunities.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you both for your work and for that presentation, for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So let's see, we are, we're definitely off schedule. Why don't we come back at 11, which will put us behind, but we won't take the full, the full break time. 11 o'clock? Great, thanks. right. Commissioner Mall, I see a hand up.
Madam Chair, guess what today is?
What is today?
Today's the
January
114th anniversary of the establishment of the Oregon Water Code.
Is that right? Well,
So
thank
people
you,
have been
sir.
wrestling with this stuff for over a century. We shouldn't feel so bad.
Right. Wow. Why was I thinking that was the 14th? That must be something. Well, I know it's Valentine's Day, but I thought it was some other date of significance. Well, good. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. And Nirvana has a little celebratory icon going there.
I think Oregon
So-
officially became a state on the 14th.
On the 14th, is that what it is? Thank
Yeah.
you. I should
Yeah.
have my facts better. It looks good to know though.
Yeah, and thank you for that info, Joe.
What is the anniversary? I mean, how many years is it? Literally exactly 100 years?
1909, 114.
Oh,
1909.
Okay, 114 years.
It's just something I put in my Google Calendar years ago and it popped up today.
That's
Thanks,
a good
Google.
idea. All right, exactly. Okay, let's get down to our next agenda item, which is a legislative and budget update with Bryn and Danielle, it looks like will be presenting on this one.
Morning, everybody. All
Good
right,
morning.
go ahead and share my screen. All right, can we all see my screen just fine?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. So good morning, Chair Reeves, members of the commission. For the record, Bryn Hudson. I'm the Water Policy Analyst and Legislative Coordinator for the Water Resources Department. I'll let Danielle introduce herself as well as she's joining me.
Sorry about that delay. Danielle Gonzalez, Water Policy, Policy Section Manager for Water Resources. And Bryn is going to take and lead this presentation as we kind of walk through the budget and legislative update. Some things have changed in this last few weeks, and so there's some additional adjustments that we've made since you've received the staff report.
Great, thanks, Danielle. I will also note that we have Lisa Snyder, who is our administrator for the Administrative Services Division, in the event that there are more technical questions on the budget that I'm unable to answer. So we've got the full team here today. So as Danielle mentioned, we will be providing an update on the 2023-2025 Governor's Recommended Budget, and we'll also be providing an update on the happenings of the legislative session, which is in full swing as of today. Or as of January 17th, but today it's in full swing, despite the snow. So I'll start by giving an update on the governor's recommended budget summary. So this table provides a side-by-side of our 2021-2023 legislatively approved budget, our current service level for the 2023-2025 biennium, and the 2023-2025 governor's recommended budget. So as you can see, the GRB, as we're going to start calling it, the governor's recommended budget, we're going to shorten that to GRB, has both additions and subtractions in different areas as compared to the agency's current service level budget. So in the staff report, you will see, and on this slide, that there is a net gain of about 0.9 or $900,000 in general funds if you look at current service level to the governor's recommended budget. So there's a slight increase in general funds, but if you compare that to the legislatively approved budget, you will see that there is a decrease in general funds due to one-time appropriations that were made in the previous session. So that's why you see that decrease, is those one-time appropriations are not part of the base budget. You will also see that there is a slight increase in both budgeted positions and FTE, which is always exciting to see. As a reminder, the GRB is not the agency's final budget, but our starting point for negotiations with the legislature. Our budget will be finalized in late spring once we get a hearing date with the Joint Ways and Means Committee. As of today, we do not have a hearing date yet, but anticipate that we might, the earliest that we might be up in front of the committee is in early April. is kind of what the agendas are looking like. The next slides will lay out where those reductions and additions are, and I'm going to start out by talking about the additions that you'll see in the department's GRB. So Raquel did a fantastic job of priming you all for this policy option package, but the first one is POP 101, which is primarily focused on facilitating interagency work and implementing the integrated water resources strategy. So more specifically, it makes a limited duration position. So you all chatted with Crystal right before this. So it makes that position that is currently limited duration from the last session a budgeted full-time permanent position to work to more effectively implement the integrated water resources strategy, develop updates, and ensure better coordination and integration among state, federal, and local agencies, as well as working with our educational and non-governmental organization partners. This package will also include $100,000 for contracting dollars, ongoing website communication, publication costs, those kind of odds and ends of things that we often see pop up around the IWRS. So it includes that money as well. Package 105 is a package that carries over a variety of federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act that the department was not able to spend in the previous biennium. So the carryover funding is a mechanism that will essentially allow those efforts to be completed, including work on place-based planning, fish passage, an ordinance project out in Umatilla County, funding for our well abandonment repair and replacement fund, support for fee-based programs, as well as engagement with stakeholders on that issue as well, engineering services for flood methodology and inundation assessments. There is some also funding for the water measurement cost share fund, as well as funding to support surface water and groundwater data collection field equipment. And this one totals about just under 16 million of other funds because it's federal dollars. POP 107 is the package for our funding programs. So this largely includes investments around projects supporting water. So this is our largest in terms of the dollar value that you'll see. It includes 20 million in lottery bond revenue proceeds for our water project grants and loans program. It includes $2 million of lottery bond revenue for feasibility study grants, and then a $1 million allocation in general fund for the well abandonment repair and replacement fund. Package 108 contains investments, contains and continues investments for work to reduce water transaction processing times and to allow for continued processes and progress on the protest backlog. So as I mentioned, this is a continuing investments package, and it extends 4 limited duration positions, 2 caseworkers, a protest specialist, and an administrative specialist that were hired as a result of legislative actions during the 2021 legislative session, really focused at reducing water right and protest processing backlogs. The position also, or this package also adds 1 limited duration water rights processing compliance specialist, and their job would primarily be around providing outreach to applicants with recently approved permits or transfer orders. The one thing about this package that I do want to note, as you all may be aware of, the department does pay the Department of Justice as well as the Office of Administrative Hearings for services related to this work. This funding package does not include dollars to support that. So this one is just positions. Package 110 focuses on centering equity in agency programs and policies. And what this package really does is it funds 2 positions that would be responsible for leading the efforts in advancing environmental and racial justice issues around water. These positions will increase the agency's capacity to reach underrepresented and underserved communities, including BIPOC and rural communities. And it will also be working internally to create a workplace culture that is welcoming and inclusive to all. So really focusing on that internal side of things, as well as the external part of our agency in terms of centering equity and advancing those racial and racial justice and environmental justice tenets. Package 111 provides initial funding for 4 positions in contracting services for the critical work around modernizing systems and data sets that are required to update the water availability reporting model, or the WARS model. I will note that this is a reduced package from what you saw in the ARB, for the agency request budget, when we did that initial exercise. So these 4 positions will be working to develop and establish workflows for incorporating data needed to update that model. They'll be evaluating and comparing models and methods for kind of integrating the structure a little bit better. And they will also get started on some of the preliminary work to update the underlying computer programs necessary for integration of the WARS model across the agency. As I mentioned, this is a reduced package. And so what this POP does not include is positions associated with IT, which ultimately will limit our ability to fully integrate the WARS model into our databases and information governance systems. So I just kind of want to note what this POP does and maybe what it doesn't do. Policy option package 115 includes $1.5 million in facilitation costs for work related to the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation water rights settlement case. We are actively in discussions with the governor's office around this POP. I will note that you may remember this initial package included $1.5 million for general facilitation needs, with the CTUIR settlement being a piece of it. And so right now we are just trying to work with the governor's office as to whether or not this is an appropriate amount of money, if there's opportunities to maybe use it. That doesn't inflate or expand the budget at all, but we are still in active conversations on this one, so this one may change. But the dollar amount should not change. I'll just say that. There are a few other just slight one-time funding adjustments and additions that I want to note. So again, these are one-time additions for 2 pieces of work. The first is for studies and projects in Harney County. And this one is a $200,000 one-time appropriation. Additionally, there is also a similar one-time funding addition for the department's work to continue groundwater basin studies, and that's to the tune of $600,000. But those are one-time funding additions. Those are not base budget additions. Now we're going to get into reductions. So there are a number of reductions. I know these aren't as fun as talking about additions, but the first place I will start is on the 10.3% vacancy savings target. This totals about $3 million in general fund. And what this really means in terms of the day-to-day operations for the agency is that this will require us to leave about 16 positions that are funded via the general fund open each month of the biennium. So that's just a note to make. The thing that we have been trying to communicate to legislators and stakeholders alike is that vacancy savings ultimately mean that just because we have budgeted positions does not always mean that there is actually a physical human being sitting in that position. Sometimes those positions need to be left open in order to hit vacancy saving targets. So what that ultimately means is that if one of those positions, the work associated with those positions that may be being left open, work will be slowed because there actually isn't a warm body sitting in that chair doing that work. So that's just some expectation setting that we've been trying to get ahead of for folks as to what vacancy savings and open positions actually means for our day-to-day. There were also several other reductions I'll highlight. There were some partial reductions from funding received during the December 2021 special session. This would include 2 assistant water master positions and 1 evapotranspiration hydrologist that were funded related to cannabis work. There's also a cut for $325,000 for evapotranspiration projects as well. And those were part of the same cannabis package that passed in the December special session. Additionally, the water measurement cost share fund was reduced by just over $100,000. I will note that this only impacts the biennial addition for new general fund appropriations into this account. There still is $140,000 other funds remaining in this account, plus the ARPA carryover that we discussed in POP 105. There's also a reduction in outreach funds for basin studies, as well as facilitation dollars associated with complex issues in the Willamette and Deschutes basins. So you may remember those from the governor's recommended budget last go around. That's where those are coming from. And then lastly, I'll note that there were other reductions that include funds for groundwater studies and observation wells to the tune of about almost $450,000, as well as reductions to stream gauges by about $160,000. And then there are some package adjustments that you'll see in packages 92 and 93. What those essentially reflect are rates for DAS, Department of Administrative Services, as well as Attorney General costs for rates for their services. So where those reductions are is they're just an adjustment. Once the governor's recommended budget was set, those adjustments and those rates are set by the GRB. And so our then requests for those services are adjusted to reflect those reduced rates. So that's not a reduction per se in our AG budget or our DAS budget. It's just more reflective of rate adjustments. So that's what those are. At this point, this concludes the budget portion. Chair Reeves, I will let you decide if we want to pause for questions on budget before we jump into the legislative update, or if we want to just keep moving.
Well, I think we could take questions now.
Okay, perfect.
If there are any, let me see if I can. I'm just looking to see if any commissioners have their hands up. Yes, Commissioner Smitherman.
Oh, thank you, Chair Reeves. Thank you so much for the presentation on this, Bryn. And so as far as these reductions go, that doesn't mean that these activities are not being done. Is that right? I mean, it's just a reduction in what is the current budget for, say, groundwater study and observation wells. There is still a program going forward that is still doing groundwater studies and observation wells, but we have to just reduce by the 448K. Is that what I'm understanding?
Commissioner, that is correct. Yes, those are reductions to programs that are already existing. And what that essentially means is that work has to be prioritized.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make that clear to anyone else who's watching and listening in on this, is that those things are moving forward. It's just a reduction in the funding for that program. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Commissioner Mall.
Real quickly, the 10.3% vacancy savings, is that directed from the governor's office? Is that something that is asked of all agencies based on budget projections? Is that where that comes from?
Commissioner, that is accurate. So when we do our agency request budget, we are also asked to provide a suite of reduction options to kind of help the governor's office understand what the agency's priorities are. In general, the strategy that we have taken is to retain current positions that there are already warm bodies sitting in. So what that means is if we retain those positions, that means that there has to be those projected savings elsewhere. And so that could essentially means if someone retires, if someone finds a new job, what that means is you can save some money by administratively managing the budget by just holding that position open. And so that's been a current practice that is in keeping with what a lot of other agencies do. That in terms of the actual percentage savings target, that tends to fluctuate agency by agency.
Okay, Commissioner Lee.
Yes, I just was curious as to how many positions were actually requested by the department and how many were in the governor's recommended budget.
Oh, Commissioner, that's a great question. I'd have to go and pull up the agency request budget and actually do that math for you, but I am happy to do that and follow up after and then compare that with what's in the governor's recommended budget. Thank you.
Bryn, I didn't really understand what you said about packages 92 and 93. Could you kind of run that again? I'm sorry.
Yes, Chair Reeves. No. It's I had to have it explained to me a couple of times as well. So it's I'll take a stab at explaining it again, and if it still doesn't make sense, I'll probably call in reinforcements in the form of Lisa to help me out. So we pay the Department of Administrative Services as well as the Attorney General for their services, and what that usually takes the form of is an hourly rate for them to legal expenses, procurement, things like that. And so those rates fluctuate from time to time. So when we do our agency request budget, we base that and base our current service levels off of what those rates are right now. When the governor creates their new recommended budget, they adjust those rates, which subsequently means that our rates within our current service levels are adjusted to match those rates so that we're not over asking. So what basically happened is we over asked to meet what we thought the rate would be. The governor adjusted those rates went down. And then so our rates and the budgeted numbers for those rates essentially go down as well.
Okay.
Does that make a little more sense?
It does.
Okay.
So all things being equal, if this stayed in place, then our expectation is that we would get roughly the same level of service that we got in the last biennium.
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Lisa,
Chair
please-
Reeves,
yeah,
commissioners,
please
if I
correct
might
me.
add, no, you're fine on that. And Bryn, that's correct. I think these packages we didn't used to discuss because these are more, we consider these to be the more technical budget adjustments kind of packages. So
Right.
this is why we don't often discuss them because yes, essentially it's really just about the mechanics of how they do the budgeting process.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I think that's all the questions, Bryn, if you want to shift to the legislative stuff.
Fantastic. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
I did not
Okay.
see.
Sorry about that. I came in at the last moment trying to answer the question so that Bryn was off the hook on the agency request budget positions. We requested 82 new positions. And for the GRB adds 12, but removes 3. So a net of 9.
Okay, thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Lisa is superwoman. Thank you for that, Lisa. All right. So let's move over to the legislative session. So session, as I mentioned, is in full swing. It kicked off January 17th, and we're going strong. As a reminder, this is a 6-month marathon, so we can anticipate to be finished up mid to late June with this session. So right now we are tracking around 500 bills or so. There's a lot flying around this session. Many of these bills are being tracked due to their relating to clauses, and we're watching them in the event that amendments are proposed that loop the department in. So that's not to say that there are 500 bills out there that impact the agency directly, but could impact the agency. Other bills are also being tracked because they are statewide enterprise bills that impact the day-to-day operations of agencies statewide. So these are things like employment, contracting, public records, rulemaking, administrative processes, those types of things that impact all agencies. Attachment 2 of the staff report includes a snapshot of the 100 most relevant bills to department operations and to our day-to-day. I will note that at the time that this staff report had to be finalized, a suite of new bills were introduced. So that table is out of date. I will be happy to provide an updated spreadsheet for you all as the introduction deadline was this week. So we saw an influx of new water bills that I believe you all will be interested in taking a gander at. So I will be sure to make sure to follow up with Nirvana to update that spreadsheet to ensure that you all have the most up-to-date and accurate information. So as you may remember from the last time we all chatted about legislative stuff, the department was working on a few legislative concepts. Unfortunately, in the department or in the governor's transition, none of those bills were actually filed. 2 of them, however, specifically the bills related to the sunset of our split season in-stream leasing program, as well as the place-based integrated water resources planning bill, were actually picked up by legislators and are now being run by Representative Helm and Representative Owens's offices. And so just for your knowledge, the bill numbers on those for the split season leasing, that is House Bill 3164, and the water planning bill is 3163. They were both supposed to be up for a public hearing yesterday. However, the weather had other plans for us. So those hearings will be rescheduled, and we will keep you apprised to any other relevant happenings. As a reminder, in general, we take no position on bills. Our role is to be conduits for technical, nonpartisan information about what bills do, what implementation will look like, what the impacts will be to staff and water users and in-stream interests alike. So that's generally the role that we take during the session. So while we don't have any bills, we're not running any bills of our own, there are still a lot of bills this session that are relevant to department programs. The list that I have on screen up in front of you is a select short list. It is by no means meant to be inclusive of all of the water issues and exciting conversations that are happening this session. So this is just a tiny little taste, by no means all inclusive. So you'll see that water governance and the integrated water resources strategy are both pretty big topics this session. There is some legislation focused on the implementation of the IWRS, as well as how agencies can have broader coordination around water. So not just WRD, but all of the agencies that have a nexus with water. You know, how do we ensure that IWRS is still moving forward? How can we better stay coordinated? So there's a lot of interest in that this session. Water management more broadly is also a pretty large bucket of bills that we're seeing. So this includes things around water rights, things like forfeiture, exemptions, things like that. Voluntary water agreements is a bill that we're seeing popping up in discussions that we're having around that. Our protest process and what the water rights protest process actually looks like is also a discussion as well. As always, illegal cannabis and water use around illegal cannabis and our enforcement processes are a big topic of discussion. There are several bills around cannabis in general, and some of them have a nexus with water. Drought is always a big issue, always a big discussion. Water reuse, I think that there is a bill floating around that will try to look at water use, water reuse with the department as well as DEQ. And then one thing that's on this list that is particularly a big topic this session is confined animal feeding operations. That's primarily a DEQ ODA issue, but there is a nexus with water quantity in the form of the stock watering exemption. And so there are several bills that you'll see on your spreadsheet that kind of look at the stock watering exemption and water use around confined animal feeding operations more broadly. And then lastly, one other thing I'll point out is there are a few bills focused on the department's authority to process applications for transfers of stored water. So this is not a new issue for many of you. So it's still a conversation that is alive and well in the legislature. So again, as I mentioned, this is just a few of the topics that we are working on this session. The spreadsheet provides a more holistic look. And then as I mentioned, I will be pulling another report from our bill tracking software to ensure that we're capturing all of the bills that are now on the table, given kind of the timing gap between the staff report and today. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you all may have on legislative, or if there are new budget questions that popped up, I am happy to answer those as well. I will stop sharing my screen. I hope, did that work? Do you guys all?
Yeah, it did.
Okay. Just want to make sure you're
you.
not seeing my desktop, because like Raquel's, it is not as clean as as Crystal's.
No, you're good. Thank you, Bryn. That was a great presentation. You've got a lot going on over there in the legislature. Do we have questions, comments from Commissioner? Yes, Commissioner Wolf.
Back to the budget. How many positions did that 10.3% vacancy represent? I didn't catch that if it was stated.
Yes, Commissioner Wolf. So that shakes out roughly, depending on, you know, which positions those are. Some save more money than others, but it shakes out to about 16 general funded positions every month is what that looks like.
So, Raquel, your hand is up. Were you going to add to that? Response?
Chair Reeves, no, I was just
Okay.
going to embarrass Bryn. So whenever the opportune moment is, I'm happy to wait.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll let Commissioner Quimps ask questions and hold that thought.
A couple of questions. I think about the governor's emphasis on developing housing in the state. Commissioner Mall's comments about integrated, you know, better integration between water planning and land use planning. And so I wonder, you know, if making that link maybe helps develop support for the POP 101 to fund the position for the IWRS. And then I'm not sure what kind of traction or attention a product like the Oregon Water Advisory Report will get with the governor's office or the legislature, but it seems like POP 110 and POP 101 respond to the issues raised in that product. So I just wonder if there's value in making links between those POPs and those goals and products and getting support for these packages. Thanks.
Commissioner Quimps, that's a great point. And I think in some of my conversations with the governor's office and legislators alike, I think there is a definitely an interest and a shared value and need in making that connection to land use and water use a bit stronger. And so when we talk about water governance and interagency coordination, I think the housing discussion as well as land development is one of those front and center topics that we look to as, you know, why that needs to be a broader part of the water discussion. So I think there absolutely is value there. I saw Danielle's face pop on, so I don't know if she wants to add to that.
Yes, thank you. What I would add is the IWRS in particular, that is something that we've really moved towards is making sure that we're including land use and DLCD in the conversations. So that is moving forward, and I'm excited that potentially in June that there'll be a deep dive on a work session with this commission here to talk through all of those pieces and how we integrate land use into that into the IWRS as well.
That's great. And if there's ways we can help with that, you know, I would certainly be interested in helping make those links and calling attention to the need to support those. Thank you.
Commissioner Smitherman.
Thank you, Chair Reeves. Bryn, I just had a clarifying question. So we have the proposed budget from the governor, and then we have all of these bills that are being proposed. So if any of these bills get passed, does that free up more funding to make it happen? Because it seems to be that some of the things that we're being asked to reduce, there's bills in place that may get passed that would necessitate more funding to actually implement the requests within those bills. And is that something that is generally decided after those bills get passed?
Yeah, Commissioner Smitherman, that's a great question. So when we say the governor's recommended budget is our starting point, that speaks exactly to your question. So we have the governor's recommended budget lays out what our funding priorities are. So we are trying to guide policy to fit within what the budget constraints that we are working with. When bills are passed out of committee, if there is a fiscal impact, so there are some bills that are maybe new funding programs or require positions to carry out that work, they then go to the Joint Ways and Means committees, where basically all of the numbers then get figured out. So what that committee does is they look at all the natural resource agency budgets. They look at all of the natural resource bills that have fiscal impacts. They look at the money they have available, and then they start adding things in, pulling things away. So the governor's recommended budget really provides that foundation for us to work with, but it's by no means the final say on what happens, because as you see, there are lots of bills that have potential budgetary impacts. So it ultimately depends on what the legislature, with discussion with us and the governor's office, decides and passes out of those committees.
Okay, so essentially they could adopt one of the bills and determine that is more of a priority than some of the other projects and ask for reductions in other areas. Okay, thank you.
Accurate, yes.
Appreciate that clarification.
All right, thank you. Raquel, this might be a good time for you to speak up.
Cherise, I actually have to go.
You can't leave yet.
Chair Reeves, Commissioners, again, for the record, Raquel Rans here, Deputy Director. And I just want to take a moment for everybody to really recognize the great work that Bryn is doing. This is, I think, the first time since I started at the agency in October of 2013 that I have not done the legislative update or during a session, I should say, because I know, Bryn, you've done some outside of session, but during a session. And this is actually the first time that I have not been the lead on the legislative session since 2013. Bryn has really taken on this work, and she is doing an excellent job. There is a lot of water bills this session and a lot of very complicated water bills this session. And she is just, I am so proud of her. And I tell her this every week. And so she's no longer embarrassed, I don't think, because she's gotten used to hearing the feedback. But I do hope that you all take some time to, as you see her behind the scenes doing all the work here, to note that she really is just doing a lot of work on the back end. And I'm just continue to be very grateful that we have her doing this work for us at the agency. And also I'm relieved that I'm no longer the one that has to do it all by myself. So thank you for letting me put that on the record with all of you.
Thank you, Raquel. And Bryn, well done. Well-deserved praise. Appreciate that. And Lisa and Danielle as well. So, okay, so that will conclude our agenda item, legislative and budget update. We have one more agenda item. Bear with me for just a moment. So we have one person who has requested to speak oral comment, public comment, but we also have, I wanted to acknowledge receipt of written comment that we got from Tony Newbill in Powell Butte, talking about water conditions in the Deschutes Basin and suggesting looking into cloud seeding, which I know is a technology that got a lot of attention years back and is getting a lot of attention now. I don't know where where Oregon will be on that, but there may be more to come on that. I just wanted to acknowledge receipt and thank Mr. Newbill for taking the time to write to us. So moving on to public comment, we have a request from Christopher Hall, who's the Executive Director of the Water League. Mr. Hall, are you, I see you. Welcome. We would like you to keep your comments today to 5 minutes, and we're happy to have you here.
Chair Reeves and the rest of the members of the Water Resources Commissioners and staff and everybody else, thank you. And it's an honor to have an opportunity to speak here today. I will certainly take less than 5 minutes, I think. I wanted to just touch on a couple things. One is that I really support the idea of having more meetings if you can. I understand that the staff may have a lot more work to do to prepare for them, but I think your engagement and your more direct engagement in the matters of Oregon water as increasing water scarcity becomes an issue is called for. It calls for more involvement. To that point, the critical groundwater areas, and I think I wasn't present for this yesterday, but I think you received some updates and information as to how the Division 10 rules rewriting is going for critical groundwater areas. And I think we all know that designation of a critical groundwater area and then the potential imposition of corrective control provisions may be the most politically charged work that the Water Resources Department and the Water Resources Commission and the state of Oregon itself actually takes with regard to water. And that's mainly because of the impacts to development of future housing and commercial and industrial, but also potential curtailment of water for agricultural uses, which we all know use the vast majority of water in the state of Oregon, and of course, all other states in the west of the United States of America. So to give you an idea of just like how crazy this might just become and start getting is this week I was contacted by the press, and the reporter said that their editor wanted them to look into whether Chris Hall was using that U-2 spy plane that was parked on the tarmac at Medford Airport to do mapping. And I mean, it's just absurd. And what's even more absurd is that the press probably isn't aware of like just how unlikely that sort of thing is to happen. I looked into, we had a very nice chat for about a half an hour, but I looked into it. It's $32,000 an hour for the US military to operate that plane. And yet OpenET is free. And of course, we know OpenET is the NASA and the United States defense industry plus Google and the Walton Family Foundation and a number of organizations work to make that a free resource to be able to go and have a look at what water use is. And so I explained that, and oh, okay. So I'm actually a member of the folks on the Rules Advisory Committee with regard to the Division 10 rules on critical groundwater areas. And I've noticed a couple bills have come across. One is to try to make ORS 537.745, which is the voluntary agreements to manage water among water users. And it's never been used in the state since its passing or since its use. And the reason why is because it's almost unworkable. If the state of Oregon and all the professionals who work every single day at the Water Resources Department struggle to deal with critical groundwater areas, the chances of water users who have a distinct conflict of interest ever making it work among themselves is just not going to happen, which is why it hasn't happened. And the idea that you can hire one person, as House Bill, I think it's 3130 or something, says, well, let's get one person to help make that happen. I just don't see that happening. And yet that was put in as a result of a need to try to, if not, I'll just say it, as a need to preempt the Water Resources Commission's efforts to designate and impose corrective control provisions for critical groundwater areas. In fact, the attorneys for water users sent in to this RAC a letter to that effect, that like, hey, you guys got to like do voluntary water commitments. So any opportunity to preempt what the Water Resources Commission would do professionally is there. When that came into question, I brought that up and brought that into question directly with the legislators, particularly Representative Owens. Then just 2 days ago, and let me see, which is it? It's House Bill 3357 just dropped at the last second before you can put legislation in, and that is Representative Owens also brought that one in, and it's about $105 million appropriation of monies to purchase water rights in areas where critical groundwater areas have been designated, but corrective control provisions haven't been implemented yet. And the idea is that the state would buy out water rights and allow them to be canceled. Well, it turns out that this representative has junior water rights, in fact, from the 1970s and the early 2000s. And so I'm concerned that the politics of critical groundwater areas is just spiraling out of control because the legislature could be looked at as being used as a cash register for those who are trying to avoid priority or seniority. So if corrective control provisions are imposed, it's going to start with juniors working their way up to seniors. And the idea the state's actually going to go and spend $105 million and buy out people in critical groundwater areas, that's just avoiding the current system. And it brings into question abuse of a number of like state agencies and state works. And so I just want to put that out there that the politics are getting pretty crazy, and you probably know better than I do how to handle it. And that's all I have to say. Thanks so much.
Sorry, I had trouble unmuting. Thank you, Mr. Hall. Appreciate your time speaking with us today. Do we have any questions or comments from commissioners? Okay, it looks like we do not. So that was our last agenda item. This concludes our meeting, which was supposed to be in person. I'm sorry we didn't get to see each other, and next time, perhaps. So go well, everybody. We are adjourned.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good to see you.
Bye-bye. You
Thank
too.
you.
All right, see you, everyone. Take care, stay warm.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Take care.